Good morning. My name's Amy Neville. Thank you so much for having me here today to share my story and update you on the progress of our movement to educate and empower our youngest citizens. Unfortunately, my family's story has been commonplace in America, but the lessons remain largely untaught. At 14, Alexander was a brilliant and witty young man with a big future. As someone who held himself to the highest standards, he pushed himself to be a good student, a good scout, a good skater, a good marksman, and so many other things that he tried. When Alex was 13, he and some friends began vaping in middle school. Later, they moved on to cannabis, a very common occurrence with teens these days. As a family, we intervened. We put better guardrails in place. It turned out that Alex had attention deficit challenges that surfaced during puberty, and he was struggling. We met with a psychologist and his teachers, and we were making progress. And then along came COVID-19. With the lockdowns, many of the channels needed to help Alex and others were placed on hold. In May of 2020, Alex celebrated his final birthday. Summer break began, and when he wasn't meeting with his friends at the strip mall, he was meeting up with them on Snapchat. We later learned that Alex and his friends were being connected by this popular and trusted social media app, Snapchat, to meet with drug dealers as well. He was quickly groomed by these dealers and started trying what he believed was oxycodone. I quickly recognized something was off about him, and I asked him if he was using something. At first, his response was no, but then about 36 hours later, Alex came back to his father and I and explained what had been going on. He told us about oxycodone, and he cried about it having a hold on him. He told us he met with a dealer on Snapchat. We contacted a behavioral clinic to assist us. They needed to get back to us with their recommendation. The next day, he spent time with his dad. They went out to lunch. He went and hung out with friends. He came home later that evening, went to his room, and that was the last time I saw him alive. The next morning, I found Alex, pale, blue, and lifeless, lying on his beanbag chair. His dad performed CPR while I spoke with the 911 operator and looked after my daughter. I believe it had been maybe 10 days from Alexander's first pill to the day that he died. We couldn't understand how this could have happened so fast until law enforcement searched Alex's room and found a little jar with a couple of fake oxycodone pills that tested positive for fentanyl. This is how I learned about the illicit fentanyl crisis in the new drug landscape. To better understand what happened, we began meeting with health professionals, law enforcement, attorneys, you name it. I talked to every subject matter expert you can think of. And when it came time to create our presentations, something was missing, and that was the youth perspective. And so after that, we started meeting with youth on a regular basis starting in November of 2020. At Alex's funeral, we began making pleas to families to catch up with the new paradigm. There was a lot of unfortunate lessons to be learned from Alexander's experience, and we did not want anyone to learn the way that we did. That's why we began the Alexander Neville Foundation, and we worked tirelessly to educate young people on the current drug crisis and social media harms. We serve elementary school and high school students. I'm very proud to say that we have served over 300,000 people in the last 3 years across this country. The lessons that I bring with me to families, schools, and other organizations are youth informed. I do not create anything without input and youth approval. They are on the front lines of these co-occurring fentanyl and social media crisis, and there is a lot that we can learn from them. Most adults today grew up at a time when teen drug experimentation did not end with death. Most parents and teachers do not realize illicit fentanyl is in all drugs now. Most parents and teachers do not realize how accessible and tempting platforms like Snapchat have made these dangers. How can they teach their children this knowledge without having it themselves? That situation has helped make young people the most vulnerable to this epidemic. Most young people who consume or overdose on illicit fentanyl have no idea that they have ingested it. They bought oxycodone, Xanax, Adderall, or something else. To help illustrate that problem, we began referring to these victims as being poisoned. For users not intending to purchase or consume illicit fentanyl, this is a fatal betrayal that is akin to the issue of purposely tainted food or medicine. Today, illicit fentanyl is clumsily mixed into cocaine, methamphetamines, or pressed to look like FDA-approved drugs. Those who don't know better are being deceived to death. Meanwhile, those who know are playing Russian roulette. This is referred to, like I said, as fentanyl poisoning. By referring to Alex's death as a poisoning, it helps overcome stigma and opens doors to a conversation. If I say overdose, I met with parents who think they do not need to listen because they do not have a drug problem in their household. When I say poison, parents want to know more, and that's because we are conditioned from the time we're going to have these babies in our homes to prevent a poisoning and what to do in the event of a poisoning. The second lesson is the undeniable link between illicit drugs and social media companies like Snapchat. While it is illegal to advertise and transact drugs online, it is still widespread, and they know it. Today's social media companies have become the proverbial last mile for drug distribution networks. Social media, in particular Snapchat, is the most efficient means for soliciting and obtaining new clients, especially youth. As I bring these lessons to families, schools, and organizations, it is imperative that we overcome the stigma around substance misuse. I do not advocate that we just accept substance misuse, but we must accept the reality that large proportions of Americans have tried or regularly used drugs. Not only do the studies support the pervasiveness of drugs, but the overwhelming number of drug poisonings and deaths show that the walls of denial only make matters worse. The operations delivering illicit substance to our loved ones have not stopped because our community, like so many others across the country, refuse to admit or accept that there is a drug problem. Instead, the stigma keeps families ignorant and blames the victims. Today's stigma is also keeping naloxone out of the hands of youth, families, and schools. As overdoses and drug poisoning deaths begin to haunt more American families, it becomes apparent that this problem has become endemic in the same way that heart disease or other health issues are. That is why I advocate for the distribution of naloxone and first aid kits, the same way we distribute AEDs. Naloxone should be available in schools, airplanes, and all manner of public spaces. In fact, I'm a huge proponent for getting it into the hands of our youth. Again, it's the youngest Americans that are the most vulnerable and need prioritization. Youth, parents, teachers, administrators are on the front lines. Essentially, they are our first responders to these poisonings and overdoses. They are our key change makers that will build a healthier and safer future. As I close, I need to reiterate that we don't have to accept drug use as normal. Instead, we must accept that drug misuse is not going away, but we can halt the deaths and addiction via education, awareness, naloxone, and like Theo said, all forms of naloxone, and destigmatization. The last thing I wish to share is that in my experience with our young people, they want the truth, and that's exactly what we need to give them. Thank you.